So now we're going to move into chapter 17. All right, so chapter 17 is on oligopoly. So this is the last of the 4 market structures we'll look at in this chapter. So we'll look at what are outcomes possible under oligopoly, and you'll see why it's difficult for them to cooperate. And we'll see how game theory could be used to analyze these situations, and how antitrust laws can help foster competition. So remember, we talked about concentration ratio at the beginning of chapter 16. So this is how small number of firms dominate a market. So it's calculating the market share of the top 4 largest firms, so in terms of output. So the higher the concentration, the less competition you have. So most industries have a concentration ratio of less than 50%, but in chapter 16 we saw that quite a few have very high concentration ratio. The leading examples that you might be familiar with is like, say, batteries. So what are the leading companies that produce batteries? On Wednesday we talked about, there's Energizer, there's Duracell, but who else? I mean, you can try to name some, but they're much less well known in the industry of batteries. Similarly, for beer, there are a handful of beer companies that you know, but beyond that, they're only very small firms. This is in contrast to, think about cell phones. Well, Apple, of course, is big, Samsung is big, but there are plenty of other Android phone producers that are known. And also, the market share for the top 4 big cell phone producers do not have that much overall market share. So in these industries, this is where we talk about oligopoly, because you have a handful of firms that dominate the whole market. So to go back to the big picture, so if you look at the number of firms, you can distinguish the 4 types of market structures. So if there's only one firm, that's the monopoly. And if you have a couple of firms, that's oligopoly. The examples that it gives here is tennis balls and cigarettes, because there are only a handful of companies that produce the majority of the market output for tennis balls or for cigarettes. And in contrast to many firms, because of free entry exit, so there you have either differentiated products, that's monopolistic competition, that's the previous chapter, or perfect competition, where you have identical products. So for oligopoly, so this is the market structure where only a few sellers are selling nearly identical products. So in the spectrum, it's also in the middle where you have nearly identical products, but it's not a monopoly. It's not like you have a lot of sellers, you only have a few sellers. So here, a firm's decision on price and quantity can affect other firms. So this strategic interaction is very important. So if you think of, say, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, most people think they're very similar, but some, of course, like one over the other. But the pricing of Coca-Cola would have a huge effect on the market outcome for Pepsi and vice versa. So what they would do against each other, so there's a lot of interaction there. Similarly, if you need gasoline, in Taiwan, there's Taiwan CPC and FPC. There are 2 big companies that sell gasoline. But because of that, so if Taiwan CPC lowers the price today, very likely FPC would react to that immediately. Because if my competitor has a lower price, and if I don't change my price, it's almost surely that all my customers will go away. And so I would have to react to that. And if I run a promotion and I give out these small gifts, if you come to my gas station, then of course my competitor is likely to also provide their promotion. And so there's a lot of these strategic interactions in these oligopoly markets. Okay, so they will have to take into consideration, if I do this, then my competitor will respond. That's the essence. Compared to a monopoly, I don't have to care because I don't have a competitor. Or compared to under perfect competition, the firms are a price taker. So, I just do what I do. I don't have to care about everybody else. And so here, game theory is introduced to try to analyze the strategic situation. All right, so what are the possible outcomes? One possibility that's good for these oligopolists is to just cooperate and work together to act like a monopoly. So that's one possibility. And because, well, if we all act like a monopoly, then we can divide the monopoly profit, which is quite substantial. However, there is an incentive to deviate and to basically betray this agreement. And so it's not that easy to maintain this cooperation. Okay, to look at this, let's look at a simple example of a duopoly. So that's two firms. For oligopoly, it's usually a handful of small number of firms, but a leading example would be two firms. So that's a duopoly. So the market has only two sellers. This is the simplest type of oligopoly. So here we have the gas station duopoly in Taiwan. So Taiwan, not to be confused with Taiwan, has 23 million residents. And here is Taiwan's demand schedule for gasoline. And so at different NT dollars per liter, what you get is the amount of gasoline that's demanded. And so in Taiwan, there's only two gas selling firms, the Taiwan CPC and FPC. So this is a duopoly. Quantity here, of course, is liters of gasoline. And let's just make this very simple. So the marginal cost for selling gasoline is only 5 NT dollars per liter, and there's no fixed cost. All right, so let's take a look. You can calculate the revenue, that's price times quantity. So the cost for producing is 5 NT dollars times the quantity. And so you can calculate the profit. So if you're a monopoly, then you're earning this profit. If the two duopolists are cooperating and trying to sell at the right amount, act like a monopoly, they can split this monopoly profit. All right, so let's take a look. So if you're pricing a marginal cost, so that's the competitive outcome. So that's when you earn zero economic profit. So this is the competitive outcome. If you collude and act like a monopoly, you have this monopoly outcome. So to maximize the monopoly profit, well, you charge a high price of 35 NT dollars per liter, and you're selling much less than under perfect competition, but jointly you're earning quite a lot, 132,000 NT dollars. So these are the two possible outcomes. One is to compete like crazy, just like you're under perfect competition, and the other is a monopoly, so to coordinate and act like a monopolist. And of course, you can think of other outcomes in between, but here already we see two possible outcomes. And of course, it depends on can these duopolists cooperate. And in general, so one possible outcome under oligopoly is collusion. So these firms on the market agree that, so let's sell this amount at this price, and so they agree on that. And by doing that, so these firms would form a cartel, so they act in unison, and so they can earn a lot of money. So that's collusion. Okay, so what is the collusion outcome in Taiwan? So here's the market condition for Taiwan. So each gas company can agree the monopoly will sell 4,400. So each of these two firms will sell 2,200 liters of gasoline at a price of $35. And so they can split the monopoly profit. So each gets 66,000 NT dollars. And so the question, so if FPC decides to cheat on the agreement and sell 3,000 instead of 2,200, what happens to the market price? And so calculate FPC's profit. And then is it in FPC's interest to cheat on the agreement? And of course, you can ask the similar question, if both companies cheat, then they both sell 3,000 each, then calculate their profit. Okay, so let's join the quiz. So each firm has a marginal cost of $5 and zero fixed costs. They agree to sell at 2,200 and at the high price of $35 per liter, and each can earn 66,000 NT dollars in profit. Suppose FPC decides to cheat on the agreement and plans to sell 3,000 instead. What happens to the market price? So a lot of you say the market price will be 30, some say differently. And yes, and the answer is 30. Next one. So what is the profit of FPC? Is it in FPC's interest to cheat on the agreement? Okay, so majority of you say yes because profit is above 66,000 NT dollars. Some say no, some are indifferent, and the answer is yes. All right, interesting question. Suppose both firms decide to cheat and both produce 3,000 liters of gasoline, then what are their profits? Okay, so the majority of you say their profit is less than 66,000 NT dollars. Some say it's the same, some say it's higher, but it is truly less. Okay, so let's look at this calculation. So if both stick to the agreement, 2,200 liters, each earn 66,000 NT dollars. Now suppose FPC cheats, so Q1 becomes 3,000. So the market quantity is 3,000 plus the 2,200, so 5,200. That means that the price will become $30. And so because of that, so we can now calculate FPC's profit. FPC is going to sell at $30. The marginal cost is $5. So he earns $25 each, and multiplied by 3,000, FPC is earning 75,000 NT dollars. And of course, that's higher than the 66,000. So FPC will be happy to cheat. There you see why there's this incentive to deviate from this agreement. Well, if you stick to the agreement, you earn 66,000. But if you secretly cheat on this agreement, you get 75,000. But of course, the problem is that if you cheat and your competitor also cheats, Q1 and Q2 are both 3,000. Now what's going to happen? Well, if the market quantity will be 6,000, so what that means is that the market price now it becomes $25 because now you're 6,000 liters of gasoline on the market. So now your profit is 3,000 times the difference between $25 and $5. So both of them only get 60,000 NT dollars. So what this means is that, yeah, it's good if I cheat and you follow the agreement, but if we both cheat, what's going to happen is that we're both worse off compared to both cooperating. So, okay, yeah. So here you have this collusion versus self-interest trade-off that both firms will be better off to stick to the agreement because we collude, act like a cartel, act like a monopoly, but each firm has the incentives to cheat. And so it's not easy to enforce this collusion. So it's difficult for oligopolists to form cartels and honor their agreement because there's always this incentive to cheat on their partners. So okay, so let's move on. So now suppose both cheated, so the agreement broke down. So 3,000 each. The market price is $25. So each firm's profit is $60,000. Now, should FPC increase quantity further to 3,800? And should Taiwan CPC all increase quantity to 3,800? So, okay, so let's take a look. So is it profitable? Should FPC increase quantity to 3,800? Remember, the market price depends on the total market quantity, and the marginal cost is $5, if you forgot that. Okay, so the majority of you say no because profit will be less than 60,000 NT dollars, and that is the answer. Second one, should Taiwan CPC make the same decision as FPC? Yes, no, don't know. Okay, so let's look at your answers. So some of you say yes, some of you say no, and the answer is actually yes. So let's take a look. So if FPC increases quantity to 3,800, so market quantity is 6,800, so now the price becomes $20. So the profit is 3,800 times the difference between 20 and $5. So now FPC only earns 57,000 NT dollars. So in that respect, it's not worth it. So you're getting less profit than both selling 3,000. And the same is also true for Taiwan CPC. So if Taiwan CPC deviates from this both selling 3,000 situation, well, they have the same cost and the market condition is the same. So Taiwan CPC would also only earn 57,000 NT dollars in profit. So it's lower than if Taiwan CPC follows the agreement. Okay, so in this case, both producing 3,000 is where they would stick at. This is what we call the Nash equilibrium. So this is where both these economic actors, they interact with each other and each choose their best strategy. So given what you're doing, I'm doing my best. Given what I'm doing your best. So this is the Nash equilibrium, given the strategies of all the other actors that are choosing. So when the firms in the oligopoly, they each individually choose to maximize profit, well, what you get is this Nash equilibrium because they're both maximizing profit given what the other side is doing. So compared to the collusive outcome, well, deviating from the collusive outcome is more profitable. But deviating from the equilibrium outcome of the oligopoly, it's not worth it. So here you see producing in between, this is the Nash equilibrium. And in general, it's also true. So the oligopoly outcome, the quantity is greater than the monopoly outcome, but it's smaller than the competitive outcome. So it's in between. And in terms of price, the market price will be lower than the monopoly price, but still above the competitive price where you're equal to marginal cost. Okay, and the key thing here is that you're producing more outputs, and there are two effects on the firm's profit. One is the output effect because you're selling more products and you're selling at a markup, so increasing output raises profit. But there's also a price effect because to sell more products, you need to lower the price for all of these units you sell. And so that would reduce the profit on all units that you sell. Okay, so here we had the example of only two firms. As the number of sellers increase, what you get is that the price effect becomes smaller, but the oligopoly looks more and more like a competitive market because you have more and more sellers in this market. And so the price approaches marginal cost. So in this sense, the oligopoly market is sort of in between. With only one firm, that's a monopoly. Adding a second firm, you have a duopoly. Adding a third firm, you have a triopoly, and so on. But once you add more and more firms, then you basically you converge towards the competitive market. Yeah, and of course what that means is that because your price is approaching marginal cost, the market quantity is going to approach the socially efficient quantity. And in that sense, it's good to have international trade because you're introducing more competition, more firms coming in. It used to be actually in Taiwan that there's a third gasoline company called Esso that also sells gasoline. But eventually they decided to leave the market. And actually there are talks about, so what is the entry barrier for gasoline companies to enter Taiwan's market? I think the key thing is that you need to build up a huge storage of oil just in case Taiwan faces a blockade from China. But it's a huge cost to store this amount of oil and to just let it sit there. And of course, Taiwan CPC and FPC having their own refineries in Taiwan, they can do that. But for other international competitors, it's not worth the trouble to do that. Taiwan's not that big a market, and so we only have 2 gasoline sellers in Taiwan. If we can try to reduce these barriers of entry and introduce more international trade, so it's actually good in the sense that we can get more competitors into our gasoline market and things will improve. Okay, so here's a statement, and let's look at whether you agree or not, or whether economists agree or not. So this is about market share and market power. If a small number of firms have a large combined market share in a properly defined market, it is strong evidence that those firms have substantial market power. So just looking at the market share, so a handful of firms having a huge market share, that means the concentration ratio is high, that means these firms have market power. Do you agree or disagree? And more importantly, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? Okay, so do you agree or disagree? If a small number of firms have a large combined market share in a properly defined market, it is strong evidence that those firms have substantial market power. Strongly agree, agree, uncertain, disagree, strongly disagree, no opinion, or prefer not to answer. This is an opinion poll, so there is no right or wrong here. Okay, so let's look at your answers. Majority of you agree, some strongly agree, some are not sure, some disagree, and okay. And the more important question is, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? 100% agree, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49%, 0%, or don't know. So the majority will say 50 to 99% agree. Some say 100%, some say 1 to 49%. And the answer is indeed 50 to 99%. Let's look at the survey results. So this was a panel survey done in 2018. So actually 54%, so right above half economists agreed. 21% were not sure, but 25% disagreed. So now let's go back to the cooperation issue. So here, usually we talk about the prisoner's dilemma. So this is a particular game between 2 captured prisoners, and it illustrates why cooperation is difficult to sustain, even though it's mutually beneficial. So we usually use this, although this started as a more abstract mathematical concept, and so the story is about 2 prisoners, but we use this game, the prisoner's dilemma game, to try to explain a lot of these oligopoly situations. So in this game, we have 2 concepts. We already saw the Nash equilibrium. That is, I'm doing my best response to you, and you are doing your best response to me. So mutual best response is Nash equilibrium. The other concept that we'll talk about is a dominant strategy. So this is a strategy that is best for a player in a game, regardless of what the other person is doing. Okay, think about studying. So should you study or not study, right? It might depend, are your classmates studying? Well, but okay, so if your classmates are studying, and if you study, well, you get a good grade like your classmate. If you don't study, then you fail the class because, well, I mean, your classmates are studying and they get a good grade, but you don't, so you fail the class. But if your classmates are not studying, then should you study or not? Well, if you're studying, then you get A+, right? But if you don't study, well, okay, so then you get the same crappy grade as your classmate. And so as long as you find an A+ much better than getting the average grade of your classmate, well, regardless of your classmates studying or not, it's always beneficial for you to study. So please, study principles of economics. Study like crazy. Okay, anyway, so that's a dominant strategy, but we'll see. Okay, so here's the example of the prisoner's dilemma. So the police have caught Joseph and Josephine, two suspected bank robbers, but only have enough evidence to imprison each for 1 year. So what they do is the police question each of them separately in the rooms and offer them the following deal. So if you confess and implicate your partner, you go free. If you do not confess, but your partner implicates you, you get 20 years in prison. If you both confess, each will get 8 years in prison. So confess or not confess? That is the question. Okay, so let's take a look. So here you have Joseph's decision, confessed or remain silent, and Josephine's decision, confessed or remain silent. So if Josephine confesses and Joseph also confesses, Joseph gets 8 years in prison. But if Joseph remains silent, Joseph gets 20 years in prison. If Josephine remains silent, Joseph goes free if Joseph confesses, and Joseph gets 1 year if he remains silent. So, okay. And of course, it's similar for Josephine as well. So if Joseph confesses, Josephine gets 8 years if she also confesses, but she gets 20 years if she remains silent. And if Joseph remains silent, Josephine can go free if she confesses, but she gets 1 year if she also remains silent. Okay, so what do you think these two prisoners will do? Well, one thing you should notice here is that confessing is a dominant strategy. Why? Let's go back and rewind. Let's take a look. If Josephine is going to confess, then Joseph would get 20 years of prison if he remains silent. But he gets only 8 years if he also confesses. So the best response to Josephine confessing is to also confess, because at least I only get 8 years instead of 20 years in prison. If Josephine remains silent, well, confess is still better because Joseph goes free compared to 1 year in prison if Joseph remains silent. So regardless of Josephine's action, confess or remain silent, it's always better for Joseph to confess. So confess is Joseph's dominant strategy. Similarly, same thing for Josephine. If Joseph is confessing, she gets only 8 years compared to 20 years if she confesses. And if Joseph is remaining silent, she gets to go free if she confesses, compared to getting 1 year if she remains silent. So regardless of what Joseph is doing, it's always better for Josephine to confess. So for both players, confessing is the dominant strategy. And of course, because of that, so when both are playing the dominant strategy against each other, they are best responding against each other. And so it's also the Nash equilibrium that both are confessing. And of course, if you think, wait a minute, I mean, if they both remain silent, it's better, right? I mean, both can get to only have 1 year in prison, and then they can enjoy whatever they got from the bank. But because of this prisoner's dilemma, too bad. I mean, the police broke both of them, both confessed, and so that they both get 8 years in prison. Okay, so the outcome of the game is that both Joseph and Josephine confess, and each get 8 years in prison. And of course, they could have been better off if they both remained silent. But even if they agree that let's all remain silent, when they are questioned separately, there is this incentive that would lure them to confess because they know that the other side is also tempted to confess. And regardless, it's always better. It's a dominant strategy to always to confess, regardless of what the other side is doing. Okay, so oligopolies are also like these prisoners in this prisoner's dilemma. Well, they form a cartel. They hope to reach the monopoly outcome. They also face this problem that of cooperating and playing the monopoly outcome is jointly rational. It's the best for them together. But they have the incentives to cheat on the agreement. Because, yeah, so if you follow the agreement and I cheat, then I can get a higher profit. So that's just like what you saw in the prisoner's dilemma. The same dilemma of Joseph and Josephine. Okay, so let's take a look. So this is the Taiwan CPC and FPC game. So they can choose to either collude and each produce 2,200 or cheat and produce 3,000. And of course, the problem is that, well, jointly, if they both produce 2,200, you get the monopoly profit. They split the monopoly profit to each get 66,000 NT dollars. But if you follow the agreement and only produce 2,200 and I cheat, I get $75,000, although you get only 55. Too bad. But of course, it's the same for you. So both of us have this incentive to cheat. But if we both cheat, then we each only get 60,000. So that's lower than the splitting the monopoly profit. And the problem here is that cheating is a dominant strategy. Well, if you are not cheating, I can get more if I cheat. But if you are cheating, then if I'm still a dum-dum and follow the agreement, then I get only $55,000. So if you're cheating, I should cheat. And if you don't cheat, I should still cheat. So cheating is a dominant strategy. So that's why the monopoly outcome is very hard to sustain, in this case, oligopoly. Okay, so similar examples of this, you can see a lot in these oligopoly markets. Say advertisement wars. So if you see these advertisements, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, they love to run advertisements against each other and promoting their own product and bashing their competitor. And if you think, wait a minute, I mean, these advertisements just cancel out, right? I mean, so the only people who gain in this ad war is the TV stations or the media, because they have this joke that Facebook is so rich because all of these online advertisements spending are spent on Facebook, but they just cancel out. So the two firms steal business from each other, but yeah, I mean, they don't really gain that much because they cancel out, and it's only the media that is gaining from this advertisement spending. So the effect cancels out, so both firms' profit goes down because the cost of these advertisements is huge. So it's similar to the person's dilemma that if they could have agreed to not run advertisements against each other, they don't have to spend so much in advertising. Of course, if we agree to not advertise, I will secretly advertise against you. So the OPEC is a cartel of countries that produce crude oil. And so the members of OPEC, they try to agree on, let's reduce production so that we can maintain a high price. But then there's always this problem that if you guys follow the agreement, I could gain if I secretly start to sell on the black market or secretly to have these secret deals to sell more oil than what's agreed upon, because then I can earn more profit. But the problem is that if everybody is doing that, then the agreement just breaks down. So you have this problem that it's good if everybody follows the agreement and forms the cartel, but individually, people have incentives, or here, countries have incentives to deviate from the agreement. Similarly, arm race between military superpowers is also like that. Why? Because if we both agree not to escalate and stop the arm race and disarm, it's good for both of us. But if you are disarming and I'm not, then I get an advantage, right? So even if we say, hey, let's disarm, but still, I mean, secretly spending more on military gives these superpowers an advantage, and so you have this arm race. Okay, before I go on, one thing I want to say on the arm race. So one issue I'm not sure about is, for example, so if you go to an interview to look for, like, say, look for a job or look for a summer intern, should you dress up a lot? Should you put on makeup? Well, there's an arm race, right? If everybody just walks in crappy, not well suited, or not having makeup, well, I mean, it's easier for everybody, right? But if nobody's dressing up and you dress up like a real salesman, then you get the job. Well, if other people are dressing up and you are not putting on makeup and not dressing properly, then you will not get the job. So again, you have this arm race in terms of dressing up and putting on makeup. And so they have this joke that the freshmen just all look like high school kids, but before they graduate, everybody's like a completely different person because they have to dress up to prepare for the job market. All right, common resources. We talked about the tragedy of commons, and that's precisely a similar problem. I mean, because, well, it's good if we all agree to preserve and to use this common resource properly. But if you guys are cooperating, following the agreement, well, I can gain if I cheat on this agreement. So then, of course, everything's overused. In our public goods contribution experiment, you also see this that, well, yeah, so everybody contributing to the pool is good for everybody, but there is this dominant strategy to free ride. At some sense, that is the problem of global warming. Well, I mean, because if we reduce carbon emissions, but the other people are not, well, global warming is still going to happen. Our effort is in vain. And so why not just enjoy it now? I mean, yeah, so there is this dominant strategy for not following the agreement. And of course, the bad outcome of global warming is just going to happen. Okay, so what is the effect of this oligopoly equilibrium on the whole society? Well, it's bad for the oligopolists because this collusive, acting like a monopoly, this collusive agreement is likely going to break down. And so you're in this Nash equilibrium. It's bad for the oligopolists because they cannot achieve monopoly profit. But that's good for the society in the sense that, well, at least consumers are better off. And so the market quantity and market price are closer to the socially optimal level. Of course, there are other examples like in the arm race or the common resource game where it's also bad for the society. Like because of global warming, the oligopoly outcome that everybody just ignores, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, that's really an unfortunate outcome. So in this sense, the oligopoly outcome, the oligopoly equilibrium could also be bad for the society, especially in these cases of common resources. Okay, so here's an example about common resources. This is fishing around Matsu Island. So assume there are only two companies that own the entire commercial fishing fleet, company Daiwan and company Dailiok. And there are no restrictions on commercial fishing around the offshore Matsu Islands. And so if both choose to catch a small quantity, each would earn 300 million NT dollars in profit. If both choose to catch a larger quantity, each will earn only $250 million in profit. Okay, so that's both choose large or both choose small. But if one firm chooses to catch a small quantity, but the other chooses a larger quantity, then the one choosing the small quantity earns only $150 million, and the other would earn $400 million. So what is the colluding outcome, and what is the Nash equilibrium? Okay, so now let's join the quiz. So if both catch a small quantity, each earn 300 million. If both choose the large quantity, each earn 250 million. If I'm choosing a small, you're choosing a large quantity, then I only earn 150 and you earn 400. So what is the colluding outcome? Both small, or one large, one small, or one small, one large, or large, large? Which one? The majority of you guys say it's small, small, and it is the right answer. All right, what is the Nash equilibrium outcome? So your answers are, the majority of you say the Nash equilibrium is large, large, and that is the right answer. So let's take a look. So here, if both fish small quantity, so both Daiwan and Dailiok choose a small quantity to fish, then both earn 300 million. If both choose a large quantity, then it's 250 each. If I choose large, you choose small, I get 400, you get 150. And so the problem here is the collusive outcome. The colluding outcome is we both catch a small quantity that's jointly going to maximize our profit. And of course, that's preserving the environment. So managing the common resource of fish is much better. But if I choose small and you deviate from our agreement, you choose large, you can gain. You get 400 million. And of course, if I'm choosing large, then there's no point for you to choose small because you're going to get very little. And so you would also want to choose large. So choosing the large quantity, fishing the large quantity is a dominant strategy. It's both for you and for me. And so the Nash equilibrium is both choosing the large quantity. And of course here, this is a prisoner's dilemma in the sense that, well, it's better for us if we jointly choose to fish the small quantity each, but we all have the incentives to deviate, and the Nash equilibrium is we both catch the large quantity. Similarly, you have this problem in the political market where candidates usually run negative campaign advertisements against each other. So think about the upcoming Taipei mayoral election. We have two candidates. One is Enoch, the other is Wang. So Enoch and Wang, they can choose to run negative ads against each other. So if Enoch runs a negative ad and attacking Wang, 300,000 voters would choose not to vote for Wang, in which 100,000 of them will vote for Enoch, but the other would say, oh, politics is so dirty, I don't want to vote at all. If Wang is going to run a negative ad against attacking Enoch, Enoch will be losing 300,000 votes, in which Wang is going to gain 100,000 of them, but the remaining 200,000 would choose to say, oh, politics is so dirty, I should just not vote at all. So question, if Enoch and Wang agree to refrain from running negative attack ads against each other, will each of them stick to the agreement? Okay, so here, Enoch's decision, do not run attack ads or run attack ads. Wang's decision to run attack ads or not run attack ads. So if Wang is going to not run attack ads, so that's cooperating, then if Enoch does not run an attack ad, then that's the status quo. But if Enoch does indeed run attack ads, Enoch can gain 100,000 votes. Wang will lose 300,000 votes. So that's good for Enoch. So Enoch would find it beneficial for himself to run attack ads if Wang does not run attack ads. And if Wang is running attack ads, then if Enoch does not run attack ads, then Enoch loses 300,000 votes, Wang gains 100,000. But in contrast, if Enoch also runs attack ads, then now Enoch will lose 200,000 votes because it also steals 100,000 from Wang, but Wang is going to lose 200,000 as well. So here, of course, compared to Enoch losing 300,000 votes and Wang gaining 100,000, well, having both of them lose 200,000 is better for Wang. So regardless of Wang's decision to cooperate or defect, well, it's always better for Enoch to run attack ads or to defect. So defecting is a dominant strategy for Enoch. And because this is a symmetric game, you will find the same thing for Wang. If Enoch does not run attack ads, it's better for Wang to run attack ads because it can steal some votes from Enoch and Enoch's going to lose a lot of votes. And if Enoch is running attack ads, then there's no point to refrain, right? I mean, you're attacking me, and if I don't attack you, then I'll be losing a lot of votes. So I might as well retaliate. So here, each candidate's dominant strategy is to run attack ads. And of course, the Nash equilibrium is both attacking, both candidates running attack ads. Remember, well, the effect of these attack ads just cancel out. So the election outcome does not change because if we were 50-50, now we're still 50-50. If I had more votes than you, then we both have reduced votes, but they cancel out, so I still have more votes than you. So the election outcome does not change at all. Whoever's going to win is going to win, because these attack ads basically cancel each other out. But there's a negative impact on society because you have lower voter turnout, more people thinking that, oh, politics are so dirty, see all these politicians just attack each other, and of course, less voters really care whether or not these candidates are doing their job when they're actually elected to the office. That's actually not good. So in that sense, it's not good. So again, you're in this prisoner's dilemma for the whole society that even if they agree to not run negative campaign advertisements and attack each other, but during the election, both candidates have the incentive to deviate and attack each other. Okay, so up to here, it's almost like, oh no, there's no hope. Well, once you see a prisoner's dilemma, then everybody's going to betray each other, and that's the end of the world. But in reality, you do see a lot of people cooperating. And there are several reasons that people cooperate. First one, if the game is repeated many times, cooperation is possible. Because if you defect now, then I could retaliate tomorrow. In fact, here we have two leading strategies, two examples of strategies that can lead to cooperation. The one is grim trigger. So if you betray me once, I'm going to betray you forever. I'm going to retaliate forever. So if your rival renegates in one round, you renegade in all subsequent rounds. So this is like, so if you attack me, I'll blow up the world. And of course, if your opponent knows that you're on this strategy, then of course they will think twice whether or not they should deviate from the agreement. Because if they deviate, then you're going to deviate forever. Of course, in reality, this may not be that easy to implement, right? I mean, suppose your opponent accidentally deviates and then comes and says, sorry, that was an accident, please, please. Are you sure you're going to blow up the world just because your opponent made a small mistake? Yeah, that's a problem. A more realistic strategy to enforce cooperation is tit for tat. So what you did to me last time, I'll do to you this time. So if you deviated last time, I'll deviate this time. Of course, if you keep deviating, then I'll always retaliate and deviate. I'm like a copycat. What you did last time, I'm going to copy that action. So if you cooperate last time, I'll cooperate this time. And if you deviate last time, then I'll punish you and deviate this time as well. And so in here, if your opponent knows that you are a tit-for-tat person, then of course they know that I had better cooperate with you, because if I cooperate with you, you will be cooperating with me. And so there are actually other reasons why you may want to cooperate. If you think of the prisoner's dilemma situation, some of you might be wondering who is Josephine, Josephine. Of course, I'm Joseph. My wife is Josephine. So there could be other regarding preferences, because if the two parties really truly care about each other, then there is a reason why I might care about the benefit for both of us, and hence I choose to cooperate. That's also possible. And of course, I mean, if you are a person like that, you might, even though, I mean, for self-interest reasons, cutting down carbon emission, preventing global warming may not be self-beneficial, but because you cherish, we have only one Earth, you cherish the whole environment, you have this kind of altruistic motivation to cooperate. So that is also possible. Yeah, I mean, in the original prisoner's dilemma, we don't know the relationship between the two prisoners, but at least they are partners in their bank robbery act. So my guess is they would be caring about each other as well. All right, so back to oligopoly. So what can the government do to improve the market outcome of the oligopoly? Well, yeah, so one of the 10 principles states that the government can sometimes improve the market outcome. So the question is, how can you induce these firms to compete instead of collude? That's the key thing. And so by increasing competition, you can be able to push the resource allocation closer to the socially optimal outcome. So, okay, the two early sort of antitrust laws in the US, they have been sort of working in this direction. So the Sherman Act actually says that if you do price fixing, or if you agree on this collusive anti-competitive agreement, this is a criminal charge. So you would have to go to jail for price fixing. That's one way to rule out this collusive behavior. And there are the follow-up rules further strengthen this. And the key thing that these antitrust laws are doing is to prevent two things. One is to prevent mergers that would give firms too much market power. So for example, when a big company wants to buy another big company, then the Department of Justice will have to decide, is this giving the new large, huge company too much market power? In Taiwan, what just happened was Quanlian just bought RT Mart, Darunfa. And so the question is, would that mean that in the retail industry, Quanlian will have so much market power? And there's even talks that they're going to buy Carrefour, Jalefu, or actually, I think it's Carrefour. It's a French company, but correct me if you know French. Anyway, so the key thing here is that the government, policymakers would have to decide, would these, of course, I mean, these mergers, you can exploit economies of scale, so there's cost savings for these mergers, but the additional market power that these big firms are exercising, would that be damaging to the whole society, especially for the consumer surplus? That is one thing that these laws are trying to do. The other thing is to prevent oligopolists to act together. So basically to make the market less competitive. One of the leading examples of this is to prevent price fixing. Actually, a lot of Taiwanese panel companies who sold LCD panels, they were engaged in price fixing. So they basically had these meetings in a conference or in a hotel, and that they would agree upon, so how much should we sell each piece of LCD panel, for example. And then, of course, one of the problems is how can you break up this collusive behavior? And so actually in the antitrust laws, there's these clause to say that if you confess that you were engaged in price fixing, the first confessor, the people who confess will be exempt from this punishment, and compared to if you decide not to confess. And it turns out that Samsung and LG decided to confess, and the Taiwanese companies chose not to confess. And so Samsung, LG got away with this antitrust thing. But these governments, first the US government and then the EU, were able to bring Taiwanese companies to court and made the case that these companies were engaging in price fixing because of Samsung and LG pointing their fingers, confessing that, yes, we were at this hotel or this occasion or this conference call that we were talking about prices. We agreed on this collusive price. So again, this itself is a prisoner's dilemma. Well, should you confess to the policymakers, to the Department of Justice when they start to investigate? And of course, even if all of the companies say, that's all deny, but there is incentives to confess. And so of course, some of the Taiwanese people would say, hey, it's all the Koreans' fault that we got punished. But it's the nature of this antitrust law designed to basically break up these cartels because, well, I mean, why should you confess? Well, I mean, you have incentives to deviate from this agreement and confess. Okay, so here is another example. We have an airline fare war game. We have two players, China Airlines and EVA Airways. And so they can choose to cut fares at 50% or leave the fares alone. If both airlines cut fares, each would earn $400 million. If neither airlines cut fares, each profit would be $600 million. And if only one airline cuts fares, but the other does not, then the airline that does cut fare would steal a lot of customers. It would get $800 million. But the other that does not will only get $200 million. Now, please draw the payoff matrix and find the Nash equilibrium. So, okay, let's join the quiz. So if both airlines cut fares, each would earn 400. If neither, each would earn 600. If only one cut fares, the other does not, the one that cuts gets 800, the other gets only 200. So what is the Nash equilibrium? Both cut fares, neither. China Airlines cuts fares, but EVA does not, or EVA Airways cuts fares, but China Airlines does not. Okay, so the majority of you say both airlines cut fares, and that is the right answer. So here is the payoff matrix. So EVA Airways cut fares don't, China Airlines cut fares or don't. And of course, the key thing is that if China Airlines is cutting fares, EVA Air does not, then EVA Air only gets 200. So EVA Air would also want to cut fare. If China Airlines is not cutting fares, if EVA Air cuts fares, it can earn 800 million instead of 600 if EVA Air does not cut fare as well. So in either case, it's always better for EVA Airways to cut fares. So it's a dominant strategy for EVA to cut fares. Similarly, it's also a dominant strategy for China Airlines to cut fares. So the national equilibrium is both cutting. Of course, in this case, it's bad for the oligopolists because they're not earning the monopoly profit, but it's good for the customers. For the consumers, now we can enjoy cheap airline tickets. Okay, yeah, so most people would agree that price fixing is something that's really bad and that should be ruled out, should be illegal. However, some economists are concerned that these antitrust laws might be going too far because there are other business practices that actually have a good reason. They have a legitimate reason, and so they may not be necessarily harmful. So here we'll look at 3 of these practices. The first one, resale price maintenance. The manufacturer decides to impose a price limit on the prices retailers can charge. One of this leading example is Apple. Apple actually has this resale price maintenance on its resellers, so you cannot sell an iPhone 13 lower than this price. Actually, Apple enforces this, so if you deviate, next time Apple actually excludes you from the reseller list. And so here the problem is that, wait a minute, this means that Apple is reducing competition between these retailers. Isn't that anti-competitive? However, one thing you should note is that the manufacturer has market power only at the wholesale level. It does not have market power at the retail level, unless Apple Store is like everywhere, and so Apple Store is a monopoly for iPhone. But there is a difference between being a monopoly of iPhone, having market power in the wholesale level versus at the retail level. And in fact, there could be a good reason for Apple doing this. Because if you think of it, all these brick and mortar stores that sell iPhones, they are facing competition from these online discount sellers. So what people could be doing is to go to Mr. Computer next door and to try the iPhone out and then put it down and then order online on PC Home or whatever to get a cheaper iPhone. But if that's going to happen in the long run, all these brick and mortar stores will go out of business because they have to pay for the rent, for the labor to maintain these stores. But then what that means is that Apple would not have enough retail stores that consumers can go and try out their products. And to prevent this from happening, so one possibility is to perform these resale price maintenance to prevent these online discounters to charge a lower price. Similarly, there are talks about trying to do resale price maintenance on books because all these bookstores cannot compete against 博客来, books.com, or Momo, or these online booksellers because the bookstores have to pay for rent, for labor, for electricity to maintain these stores. So there could be a legitimate reason why the publisher will want to do some resale price maintenance and say that even if you're Amazon or PC Home, you cannot reduce the book price below this amount. So to make sure that these full service of brick and mortar stores can survive. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, predatory pricing. So this is when a firm cuts price to prevent entry or drive a competitor out of the market, so that later it can charge a monopoly price. So it's like the leading example of this is Stone Age for you guys, but when Microsoft introduced Internet Explorer to the web browser market, back then there was Netscape, it's a shareware, so they actually charge customers to use the software, and then Microsoft brought in Internet Explorer for free. And so immediately Netscape sued Microsoft for predatory pricing because apparently Microsoft is pricing below cost because, well, I mean, you need to pay your programmers to develop this software or to maintain this software, but Netscape cannot compete with Microsoft. And the claim there was that Microsoft will drive Netscape out of business and then start to charge a huge price and harm the consumers. Predatory pricing is illegal under antitrust laws. However, it's very hard to prove that this is predatory pricing because when you cut prices, well, consumers are happy, right? I mean, so it's only when you drive this competitor out of business and then you start to charge a high price. That's where things are coming in. But before that happens, to prove that there's predatory pricing and to stop this is very difficult. And in fact, if you think of it, predatory pricing is not really rational because you're selling at a loss. You're selling below your cost. I mean, that's just crazy. And I mean, in the case of Microsoft, even though there were suspicion that Microsoft is engaging in predatory pricing, but even up to now, when Internet Explorer has already left the market, literally, and Microsoft does not maintain anymore, Internet Explorer was free from the beginning of its life cycle to the end. So there is no predatory pricing, or at least we can't find it. We don't see this after driving the competitor out of the market, it starts to charge the monopoly price. So yeah, so it's very hard to prove, and it's very hard to distinguish between, because cutting prices, providing the same service or product at a lower price to consumers, how is that bad? It's very difficult to separate. Last one, Tao-yi. So this is a manufacturer bundling two products together and sell it for one price. People complain that Tao-yi can give firms more market power by connecting weak products to strong products. So one of the leading examples is Microsoft Office, where most people only use Word and Excel, or maybe PowerPoint, and that's it. But then Microsoft starts to put in, I'm not sure if you ever use these products, there's Outlook, there's OneNote, there's Access, there's all these small products. Actually, at one point, I think Front Page or SharePoint Designer, that's a HTML editor, was bundled into Office. Most people don't really use those products, but they're still charged for that because you buy Office as a bundle. But the key thing here is that it could just be a quantity discounts. So if you're willing to buy Word, Excel, and PowerPoint together, well, you get a discount, you get a lower price. Why is that bad? Well, if the bundle is more expensive than buying each of them separately, then nobody would be wanting to buy it. So what's bad of having a discount? Actually, I remember seeing this. If you buy Microsoft Word a la carte, it's $100. If you buy Excel, it's another $100. If you buy PowerPoint, it's another $100. But if you buy Office, which is a combination of all three of these, plus all these other things, it's only $250. So instead of paying $300 for only 3 software, you get like a whole bunch of software, including these 3, for only $250. So what's bad about that? So here, it's not that Tao-yi is always good or always bad, but there are debates about these kinds of antitrust policies. So sometimes these Tao-yi bundling could actually increase economic efficiency. All right, so now let's go to the last example of this chapter. So suppose your best friend, Elijah, is new on campus. So suppose you're not in NTU, you're in a small town. And so you see, hey, wait a minute. Both grocery stores, the only 2 grocery stores in town, they both open 24 hours. And so he says, hey, that's a great idea. Staying open all the time must mean both stores make lots of profit. Question, since there are only 2 grocery stores in town, is it likely that they make lots of profit by staying open 24 hours? 2, can you use prisoner's dilemma to explain why the stores are open 24 hours a day? So there's a small town, there's only 2 grocery stores, and they both choose to open 24 hours. So is it true that they're making lots of profits to open 24 hours? And is this a prisoner's dilemma? Okay, so is it likely they make lots of profits by staying open 24 hours? So the challenge here is that we don't see the firm's cost and revenue, so we're not sure if it's really earning lots of profit. But one thing we can observe is that if there are only 2 grocery stores in town, it's likely that they're not making that much profit because it's a small town, and if they're making huge profits, other firms should be attracted to enter, but there are not that many. So it's unlikely they're making lots of profit. It's likely that they're still in business, but not earning that much. Otherwise, new firms would have incentives to enter the market. Oh, I love this. Yeah, it's close to lunchtime, so you guys are hungry. Okay, next question. Can you use Peirce's dilemma to explain why the stores are open 24 hours a day? Somebody wants beef noodles for lunch, right? Wait, what is because it's your home? 全家就是我家. Yeah, if it's in Taiwan, it's likely that you would have this issue that there are 2 competing convenience stores, and it's likely to be 7 and Family Mart. So, yeah. And the problem is this. So if there are only 2 stores in the market, and if one store is opening 24 hours and the other is not, then whichever convenience store is opening 24 hours is likely going to steal out of the business. So because of that, it's literally a Peirce's dilemma. Open 24 hours or not, and if my competitor is opening 24 hours, and if I don't, then I would lose a lot of customers. So it's better for me to open 24 hours. And if my competitor is not opening 24 hours, then, well, compared to not opening 24 hours, if I open 24 hours, then I can steal a lot of customers from my competitor. So it is a dominant strategy in this 2-store competition to open 24 hours. So the Nash equilibrium, of course, is both opening 24 hours. And it's not as good because if the 2 stores could collude and both not open 24 hours, then they would save a lot in terms of labor, electricity. I mean, paying night shifters is a cost. But because of that, so it's literally a Peirce's dilemma. All right, so to summarize, so oligopolists maximize their total profits by forming a cartel and acting like a monopolist. But it's not easy to maintain such a disagreement. But then it could also be that this monopoly outcome is likely to break down. And so in the oligopoly equilibrium, you get a quantity that's larger than the monopoly quantity and a price that's lower than the monopolist's profit, but not as low as the pricing at marginal cost, and the quantity is not as large as the socially optimal, so it's the in-between. So in this sense, it's literally in between. And then as the number of firms in the oligopoly goes up, then you're approaching perfect competition. Then usually we use the Peirce's dilemma as a leading example to analyze these behavior to see that it's difficult to maintain cooperation or collusion in oligopolies because even though collusion is good for everybody. And this logic of the Peirce's dilemma can be applied to a lot of situations. So we saw arms races, common resource problems, and of course oligopolies. And policymakers will use antitrust laws to prevent oligopolies from engaging in these collusive behavior. But to apply this, of course, price fixing is of course a problem that has been prosecuted. Actually, they use the Peirce's dilemma on these members of the cartel to break up this price fixing. But there are other practices, including tying, predatory pricing, and resale price maintenance that are controversial because there are good reasons why these practices are there. And okay, so my 1-page summary. Oligopoly is when there are only a few firms, a handful of firms, so they care about each other's action. This is why we use game theory. We talk about Nash equilibrium and dominant strategy. The leading example here is the Peirce's dilemma. I think in the homework there are other games, so look forward to that. And so there's this trade-off between collusion and self-interest. And so the key essence of the policy to help improve efficiency in this market is to try to increase competition. So we have a lot of different antitrust laws here. And so this is the homework for chapter 17. And to show you how much I love this, here are the past final exam questions. One thing you should note is that almost every year you saw at least one of them. So you know how much I love this. So if this pattern continues, I have to admit that it's very unlikely that there will be no oligopoly question in the coming up finals. So that's how much I love this. All right, so to stop here, can we calculate this with the expected values? one thing that will come up is, so when we have a dominant strategy, we don't need to think about expected values, because regardless of what the other side is doing, it's always better for me to play this dominant strategy. But there are cases when sometimes it's good to do this, but sometimes it's good to do that. One of the leading examples of this is to play rock, paper, scissors. If you play rock, paper, scissors, is there a dominant strategy? No. So suppose you are Doraemon, who can only play rock in rock, paper, scissors. What would happen? Well, of course, the opponent will always quickly figure that out and play paper against you. So playing rock is not a dominant strategy. But is playing paper a dominant strategy? No, because if I'm always playing paper, what do? Well, you should play scissors. But even playing scissors is not a dominant strategy, because if you always play scissors, you will figure that out and always play rock. I remember when my younger daughter first learned how to play rock, paper, scissors, her older brother and sister quickly figured out that they could beat her, because when she's only 3-year-old, it's easy to play rock or paper, but it's hard to play scissors, where you have to close 3 fingers and have 2 fingers out. But then, of course, what that means is that if you only play rock or paper, then her older brother and sister quickly figured out that playing paper against her is much better, because she seldomly plays scissors, until she figured out that she could play this to mean scissors, because it's easier to have 1 finger pointing out compared to 2. So in the rock, paper, scissors situation, what you get is that there is no dominant strategy. So you have to think about the expected value for playing each of these actions and find what is the natural equilibrium in this game. Okay, so I thank all of the NBA comments, but yeah, let's skip all of that. Okay, so let's stop here for this chapter. So this is the end of chapter 17.